Hello, I'm Jan Newhart, Chair and Chief Executive Officer of the Freedom Forum. Welcome to First Five Now, a Freedom Forum conversation series that explores topical issues and features current newsmakers who are using the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment to guide their work. Today, we are pleased to present a conversation with Academy Award-winning filmmaker Bryan Fogel to talk about his new documentary, The Dissident. The film offers an intimate portrait of Jamal Khashoggi, a Saudi journalist and Washington Post columnist who paid the ultimate sacrifice in his defense of freedom of speech. In October 2018, Khashoggi entered the Saudi Arabian consulate in Istanbul and never emerged. With exclusive access to the Turkish government's evidence, Fogel's film unearths secrets in a case that continues to have global implications. This program is brought to you by the Freedom Forum, which fosters First Amendment freedoms for all. Our vision is an America where everyone knows, understands, values, and defends the freedoms of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. And now please welcome our moderator, John Maynard.
Thank you, Jan. Welcome to First Five Now. I'm John Maynard, Senior Director of Programs for the Freedom Forum. It's been just over 2 years since the murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, a brutal act that continues to have global implications. Today, we welcome Academy Award-winning filmmaker Bryan Fogel, whose new film, The Dissident, provides haunting new details and evidence surrounding his killing. The film not only spells out the facts behind Khashoggi's murder, but also tells the story of the journalist's fierce advocacy for freedom of the press and freedom of speech. 2 freedoms we may take for granted in the United States, but that remain mainly ignored in Khashoggi's native country of Saudi Arabia. Fogel is a director, producer, author, and playwright, best known for directing the Oscar-winning 2017 documentary Icarus, which exposed the world to Russia's state-sponsored Olympic doping program. Before we talk to Bryan, let's watch the trailer for The Dissident.
My name is Hatice Cengiz. I am addressing you as a victim. A title forced on me after the brutal murder of my Jamal.
Jamal Khashoggi, prominent Saudi journalist and Washington Post columnist, has gone missing after visiting his country's consulate in Istanbul.
He was last seen entering Saudi Arabia's consulate seeking paperwork to marry his fiancée.
His fiancée saw him go in at 1 p.m. and was still waiting for him at 1 a.m.
Buhar olup uçmadı.
Can you tell me what happened to Mr. Khashoggi?
Saudi Arabia now suddenly is admitting that Khashoggi did die inside that building.
Jamal Khashoggi alelade bir şekilde öldürülmemiştir.
The government treated me as if I shot the king.
We knew that they would try to sweep the whole thing under the rug.
Is it true that Turkish intelligence obtained audio recordings of Khashoggi's murder?
I know why Jamal was killed. It's because of me.
Birileri tüm olup biteni rahatlıkla seyretmiş, hatta talimatlar vermiş olabilir.
We saved some particularly damning piece of the puzzle, like Saudi body double.
Jamal felt the whole country was against him, but this is not the truth. I said the best solution is create our own army.
The king firmly denies any knowledge of it. It could have been rogue killers, who knows?
I just received this. Be careful. Move from city to another one, and there's a team is going to kill you soon. It's anonymous.
He has to be killed in a way that will send message to everyone else. Because if you kill Jamal with his status, who else you cannot kill? You can kill everyone.
Warren Jamal. Once you start working with us, you're not just a journalist, you're a dissident. What do you know about the beast?
Bryan, thank you for joining us on First Five Now.
Thanks for having me. My honor and pleasure.
Bryan, you had a personal connection with your last film, Icarus, in that you are an avid amateur cyclist who explored the world of doping in that sport and so many other sports, as it turns out. But tell us what drew you to the Jamal Khashoggi case and why you wanted to make this film.
Well, coming through the journey of making Icarus and ultimately providing Gregory with safe passage out of Russia, bringing him into federal protective custody, and then following that story as the scandal unfolded at the very highest levels of government, leading straight to Putin. And then, the journey of the accolades with the film that, ended in March of 2018 with garnering the Academy Award. That journey really, really changed me. As I'd set out to make Icarus, I'd set out with to make one film, which was to show that the global, doping system in sport was a fraud, and ended up essentially not only protecting and saving someone's life, as Gregory has told me so many times, but helping to expose such a huge scandal that affected, decades of sports history, as well as, global foreign policy, international relations, and unveiling a truth behind Putin's Russia. And that experience left me with a desire to continue to tell stories of impact. And, and through that journey, I found myself truly an activist. I was fighting for Gregory's truth. I was fighting for freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of opinion. I was fighting against, the Putin's regime that was doing everything to create fake news and a false narrative regarding this story. And that made me want to continue to tell stories that had impact. And so I was looking for what that next project was going to be. And in those first 2 weeks of October 2018, of course, the world was gripped by the story of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, a Washington Post journalist, Saudi journalist, who was living in self-exile in Washington, who had walked into his own country's consulate in Istanbul seeking marriage papers to marry Hatice Cengiz, to be, brutally murdered and dismembered inside of that consulate. And as I, read this story, it checked all these boxes for me of what, I was looking for as a filmmaker and as an activist, a story of freedom of press and freedom of journalism and freedom of speech and human rights and truth to power and taking on an authoritarian regime and shining light. But the question really became to me first and foremost was, who was Jamal Khashoggi? And there were stories emerging, especially in Western media and, like Breitbart News. And even though we might dismiss that, we now know that 47% of the country, watches Fox News and Breitbart, and that is the opinion that they get. And in those forums, there were stories emerging that Jamal is Muslim Brotherhood, that he's a terrorist sympathizer, that he's an ISIS supporter, that he was friends of bin Laden, all these kind of fake narratives that were either being put forward through the Saudi administration and their lobbyists, or through the Trump administration, or other, factions. And I hired a team of researchers that spoke Arabic, and I said, look, compile me what Jamal was who he was. What was he really writing about? And as I dug into this and read his Washington Post articles, I found a moderate. I found somebody that loved his country and certainly was not calling for the overthrow of Mohammed bin Salman or the kingdom. I found someone that believed his country could be a better place, and it could be a better place with freedom of press, with human rights, that women had rights, that journalists could think freely, and that Twitter would be a domain for the people as it was intended for free speech, rather than a suppression device as Saudi Arabia has and was using Twitter for. And as I got to understand more about Jamal, it made me feel more, wanting to tell this story.
Right.
And then it hinged on being able to get the access from Hatice Cengiz, his fiance, Omar Abdulaziz, the Saudi dissident living in self-exile in Canada, the Turkish government, of course, who, there's the politics around that, but in this case, they were on the right side of this story, the Washington Post, and those that knew and loved Jamal.
Right. Tell us a little bit more about Jamal's work and why he became, such a pariah with the Saudi government.
Well, here was the guy who 60 years old at the time of his assassination, and the majority of his career, he had spent working as a journalist, right, for the kingdom. He was educated in the United States, Ohio State University. He owned and kept a residence in Washington, D.C. and Virginia. And he had been spending the majority of his life coming back and forth between Saudi and Washington on behalf of the royal family, and also writing on relations between the royal family and as a key advisor to the royal family. And as Mohammed bin Salman basically took power, what Jamal saw was, on the outside, there was this great young reformer, this, at the time, 31, 32-year-old crown prince who was in the mainstream media and through PR and lobbyist campaigns, putting himself forward as the great reformer, the guy who was going to open up Saudi Arabia, bring it into the future, women's rights, human rights, grant travel visas, open up the kingdom, expand economically, and all that Jamal was really in support of. But at the same time, he saw in this young leader repression and suppression of freedom of speech, freedom of press, and human rights that he himself had never experienced in the kingdom. He saw dissidents who voiced any opinion other than in support of MBS being jailed, arrested, tortured without charges. He saw his own friends like Osama Zamal, the young Saudi economist who disagreed that MBS should bring Saudi Aramco public, jailed and tortured, and the list goes on and on. So much so that Saud al-Qahtani, the king's kind of the prince's, like, whatever you'd want to call it, chief content officer, I guess, right? Had told Jamal, stop writing, stop tweeting, be quiet, or you will find yourself arrested. And as these threats got serious, Jamal made the decision that rather than to be silenced, that he was going to leave. He came to Washington, found a job at the Washington Post as a global opinions writer. And as Trump came to power, he saw the danger of this Trump MBS ally, that Trump was unwilling to hold MBS accountable for any human rights abuses. The United States was continuing to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia to support the war in Yemen that was a human rights disaster. And he became aware of basically Saudi's suppression of Twitter, which is uncovered in the film. And as Jamal started to write freely for the first time in his life, and his writings were always moderate. It was never, coming from a place of aggression. I think Saudi Arabia and MBS saw him as a threat. A writer writing for an American paper, the Washington Post, being critical of Donald Trump that MBS viewed so, key to his relationship. And then ultimately Jamal uncovering and realizing that Saudi Arabia was manipulating Twitter, which, as you see in the film, essentially was the parliament of Saudi Arabia, in a country where freedom of expression and speech and journalism, it doesn't exist. Twitter was a forum where people could speak, much like in the Arab Spring, and that's how the Arab Spring started. And as Jamal and Omar Abdulaziz realized what Saudi Arabia was doing on Twitter and sought to overturn and expose that, I think the kingdom saw him as an insider that had become a dissident and whose voice needed to be silenced. And they decided to murder him.
I'm glad you mentioned Omar Abdulaziz, a Saudi Arabian dissident video blogger and activist living in exile in Montreal. Tell us more about his relationship with Jamal and why he's such a big part of this story.
Well, I mean, the relationship is that Omar is now 28 years old. He left originally going to school in Montreal at 19 years old. And as he was there, he started to write critical thoughts of the Saudi government. Again, like a Jamal, but believing that his country could be a better place, advocating for women's rights, advocating for freedom of speech. That got him into real trouble with the Saudi royal family. And he basically ended up choosing self-exile. And as Jamal basically chose his own self-exile and began working in Washington, he started to reach out to other dissidents. And he made a connection to Omar Abdulaziz. And Omar, who was so, into what Saudi Arabia was doing to Twitter, opened Jamal's eyes that Saudis were in fact hiring thousands of people to manipulate Twitter, what Omar and Jamal dubbed the flies. And the two of them began working together on a campaign that they called the Bees Army, where they would combat Saudi Arabia's fake news and false narrative on Twitter by creating their own army of people that would write positive things and try to expose what was happening. In so doing, Saudi Arabia hacked the phone of Omar Abdulaziz with a software called Pegasus, which was sold by NSO, the Israeli cyber hacking company that sells cyber hacking tools to governments all over the world. They hacked Omar's phone, they hacked Jamal's phone, they saw all their messages, they saw everything that Jamal was working on, as well as Omar. And clearly that threat assessment, they decided to take action on, which led to Jamal's murder.
There's also a love story here that you document between Jamal and his fiancée, Hatice Cengiz. They were about to be married just before his death, as you mentioned. Why did you think that was important to tell in this film, which you did so tenderly?
The reason why is because, there's this idea of whatever, documentary film. And I view film, or at least my perspective on it, is cinema as an art form. And the most effective films always have an emotional connection, have a love story. You had to have someone to root for, someone to fall in love with. And in Jamal's, absence, and only going to be able to show archival footage of him, that love story was Hatice. And I viewed that Hatice's journey as a widowed fiance, fighting for Jamal's justice, and that emotional toll and that love story would hopefully lead an audience to fall in love with Jamal through Hatija. And in doing that, want to fight for justice for his murder, and also for so many others that are living under the repression of the Saudi regime. And so, I began working with Hatija very closely following after his death. And we built, quite a relationship. I think of her as like a sister now, and I've watched her grow, and I've watched her continue to fight for justice for Jamal when no one else in the world is standing up or even doing that. And I think that her story, as we follow through the film, and her journey that, crescendos at the end of the film, of her speaking in front of the consulate on the 1-year anniversary of Jamal's murder, with Jeff Bezos there and Fred Ryan and Jamal's friend, saying that that there is still no accountability in this murder. To me, is the emotional connection of the story, and why I believe that you can fall in love with Jamal through Hatija.
Bryan, there's so much unearthed footage and information in the film that personally I hadn't seen, which you were able to spotlight. There's a transcript alone between Saudi officials about anticipating Jamal's entry into the consulate and what they were going to do, are especially chilling. How were you able to gain access to this invaluable evidence?
It was a very long process. It really started with building trust. Of course, Turkey, we could go into long, especially as a Freedom Forum, long discussions about Turkish politics, Erdogan, their human rights record, jailing journalists, all these other things, right? But in this case, in this story, in the murder of Jamal, Turkey was and is on the right side of history and this story. The only country in the world that has sought to hold Saudi Arabia accountable. They're the only country in the world that has sought to hold Saudi Arabia accountable for this murder, try the Saudis and the kill squad, even in absentia, and have thoroughly investigated and sought justice for this murder. And in that, as I arrived in Istanbul in November of 2018, I was able to make a connection through a Turkish kind of fixer, and they welcomed me to meet with them, essentially because of, the accolades regarding Icarus. And I said, look, I'm not here to make a film that's disparaging to Turkey. I'm not here to dive into other politics. I'm here to basically tell the story of Jamal Khashoggi's murder and to help bring further light to that. And if you, the Republic of Turkey, the government of Turkey, will work with me, I will do my best as a filmmaker and a storyteller to do that. And that was months and months of trust building and meetings. And I spent over 7 months in 2019 in Istanbul and Ankara, essentially building that trust of the Turkish government to the extent that they finally provided me with the police footage, with the full transcript of a murder, which only intelligence agencies at this point have. It still has not been released to the public. And then they provided me with access and being able to interview candidly the president's spokesperson, the chief prosecutor, the head of the Justice Department, the CSI forensic examiner, and truly opened up their crime files to me in order to ultimately craft the film as a thriller, which it is, but also as a piece of evidence. And truly, tell the, as I call it, the untold story behind the murder of Jamal.
Bryan, the mission of our organization, the Freedom Forum, is to foster First Amendment freedoms for all. As a documentary filmmaker, how does the First Amendment guide your work and what you do?
Well, I mean, it guides my work and what I do, in that I couldn't do it if we didn't have the First Amendment. And, you know, I think what has been something to be a very, very concern, and not to speak politically, but, you know, what we have seen the last 4 years in our own country is a threat of losing that right. I mean, we have seen, that fake news is real world news, that our country is completely divided, that somehow publications like the New York Times and their writing is now called into question, or the Washington Post, or the Guardian, or publications that are deemed, for decades or centuries to be, reliable sources of news and truth, are under attack. We're finding journalism under attack, the press under attack. And, so this is not just a problem that is happening in Saudi Arabia or in China, or, in the usual suspects. We are seeing this in our own country, whether it, is, they're trying to discredit an election through fake news and propaganda, or whether trying to discredit stories that have been properly vetted and researched and written about. This is real, and the First Amendment protects that. And I think we have to have real diligence to continue to defend that, because it's not a given. It's not something that we should take for granted. And the fact that I'm able to sit here and in the freedom of my home to have this conversation or embark on a film like this should be a basic human right, but it's not. And hopefully films like this and the story of Jamal serve as a reminder to those of us that take these freedoms for granted, that they're not a given, and things can change, and they can change quickly. And the last 4 years, I mean, we have experienced essentially assault on our First Amendment rights in our own country.
There was a recent editorial in the Washington Post urging President-elect Biden to be more aggressive in finding the real truth and exposing the real truth about the murder of Jamal.
Yes.
Do you have any reason to be hopeful on that front?
Look, Biden came forward, just even on the second anniversary of Jamal's death, October 2nd, with a statement and a tweet saying, hey, if elected president, I plan to, seek justice and accountability for Jamal Khashoggi. There was a story a day or 2 days ago. Washington Post ran it, CNBC ran it, about how Saudi Arabia is actively hiring a ton of lobbyists right now to basically take on the Biden administration, believing that it's not going to be friendly to Saudi. On the other hand, you have big business. You have hundreds of billions of dollars of weapons contracts. You have an administration, and a country that, and our country that not only does trade with them, but there is substantial, incredible investment in all sorts of fields, from technology, American businesses, et cetera. And the same problem that I've been having in having a big global distributor for the film, meaning that this film is basically being independently distributed on video on demand, despite, my success with Netflix in the past, et cetera, shows that Saudi Arabia wields great power and influence in the United States, not only in our government, but also in our business. So, I don't know, but I am hopeful that Biden and his administration, with the support of, Congress and Senate, bipartisan, will seek to re-examine that relationship and put pressure on the Saudi regime. I mean, I think that's the only hope for people like Lujan al-Khatul, who is facing 20 years in jail for basically advocating that women should be able to leave the home without the permission of a male over 18 years old, or that women shouldn't have to wear a full burqa only, you know, with their eyes. I mean, things where you go, wait, it's 2020. Can't a woman be able to leave the home without the permission of a man? Well, in Saudi Arabia, the answer is no. And so, you know, these kind of things, I think, is justice for Jamal. These real world change where there's enough pressure coming at Mohammed bin Salman that, you know, that he has to change, you know, his policy on human rights. And this was something that Jamal spoke so openly about, which was you can have a country which MBS has been a reformer in that sense. There's movie theaters in Saudi Arabia, and there's suddenly concerts and Formula One racing, and there's all these things that you know this kingdom has never had before. And so you can have that, but you can also have freedom of speech. You can also have freedom of press, and that those things are not necessarily a danger to a government or to a monarchy if you're a kind monarch. And I don't understand why repression has to be part of, you know, of also reform. I think you can reform without the repression.
And finally, Bryan, one last question. What do you hope people get out of this film? Do you view it as a call to action, perhaps, for as many have not felt that justice has been, you know, completely resolved here?
I mean, it is a call to action. I made the film for Hatice Cengiz. I made the film for Omar Abdulaziz. I made the film for so many people that are in prison or living in fear of their lives because they cannot speak freely. And I'm hoping that just like in the Arab Spring, Black Lives Matter, or Me Too, or any other movement that starts, that it starts with the people. We can't rely on our government. We can't rely on big business. We can't rely on corporations, but we can rely on ourselves for change. And it's my hope that as hopefully millions of people around the world see The Dissident and will actually seek to go and rent it because it has been effectively silenced from being streamed by the major media companies in the world, that it will also serve as a call to action. And hopefully the reviews and accolades that the film have received will be enough to bring people to see the film and then want to either get involved in the Freedom Forum, get involved in the Human Rights Foundation, get involved in whether that's tweeting or writing letters and seeking justice for people like Lujan al-Khatul or for Omar's brother, or demanding that the United States stop selling weapons to a regime that is beheading 800 people a year. And that's my hope. And I remain very optimistic about that. And I hope that the film, you know, might be able to progress along on the awards trajectory too, not from a personal sense, but those accolades will help more people discover the film, see the film, learn the truth behind this murder, and take action. And you know, I did everything I could to craft the film as a big cinematic thriller, and hopefully, aside from being riveted, you're also empowered to want to see what you can do to make change.
The film is The Dissident. It opens in theaters on Christmas Day, and it will appear at home on demand early next month in January. Bryan Fogel, congratulations on the film, and thank you for joining us today on First Five Now.
Thanks, John. Pleasure talking to you, and thanks for having me.
And thank you, as always, to our donors for their support of the Freedom Forum, and you can always visit freedomforum.org for more information. And thank you all for joining us for today's First Five Now.